The morning sun spilled softly through the lace curtains of the Whitaker home, painting the wooden floor with golden streaks. The house stood at the edge of a quiet rural town in Pennsylvania, brick walls weathered by decades of wind and snow, smoke curling gently from its chimney. Inside, the warmth of family lingered in every corner. The scent of Helen's cinnamon muffins, the tick of the old clock, the hum of an old radio on the kitchen counter. Upstairs, 8-year-old Amanda Whitaker was arranging her dolls on the carpet with the kind of precision only a child with a gentle soul could have. Each doll had a name: Emily, Rose, and Sarah, and each wore a dress Amanda had sewn herself from scraps of her mother's fabric. She brushed their hair carefully, humming a tune she'd learned from Helen, a tune about spring and rivers and things that never stayed the same for long. Her little brother Daniel, however, was made of different energy entirely. 7 years old, restless as the wind, his pockets full of marbles and curiosity. He never walked when he could run. The hallway thundered as he rushed toward the shared bedroom. "Daniel, slow down!" Amanda called out, but the warning came too late. He burst through the door like a storm, tripping on the edge of the rug and scattering Amanda's dolls across the floor. "Daniel!" she gasped, kneeling to protect the fallen figures. "Look what you've done!" He stood there, catching his breath, his grin fading when he saw her expression. "They're just dolls," he muttered, shrugging. "They're not just dolls. They were having tea." Amanda looked genuinely hurt, her small hands trembling as she picked up Rose's tiny porcelain hand that had chipped off. Before Daniel could answer, a calm but firm voice came from the doorway. "Daniel Whitaker." Helen stood there, soft-spoken yet commanding, her light brown hair tied neatly behind her head. There was no anger in her voice, only disappointment, and that was always worse. "What did we talk about yesterday?" Daniel shifted his weight, avoiding her eyes. "About not running in the house. And about respecting other people's things," she added gently, "especially your sister's." He kicked the carpet lightly. "I didn't mean to." Helen sighed, the kind of sigh that carried both patience and love. "Intentions matter less than actions, sweetheart. Now, please clean up the toys, all of yours, too. I want the room tidy before dinner." Daniel nodded half-heartedly, muttering, I will." But an hour later, his toys, the plastic soldiers, the red race car, the marbles, still lay scattered around the house. Instead of cleaning, Daniel had dashed outside with his kite, chasing the early spring wind. Helen watched from the porch for a moment, shaking her head but smiling softly. He was his father's son, stubborn, full of life, impossible to stay mad at for long. That night she said nothing more. But the next morning, when Daniel woke up, something felt wrong. The shelves were empty, his soldiers, his car, his marbles gone. Even his kite, which he had left by the window, had vanished. "Mum!" he called out, panic already seeping into his voice. Helen appeared at the door, holding a cup of coffee, her expression perfectly calm. "Good morning, Danny." "My toys. They're gone." "Oh, dear," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe they left." He blinked. "Left?" "Yes. Toys have feelings, you know. Maybe they were tired of being stepped on, or ignored, or left in the rain." Daniel stared at her, open-mouthed. "Toys can't walk away." "Perhaps not on their own," Helen said, sipping her coffee. "But sometimes, when you forget to love something, it finds someone else who will." He ran through the house, checking every corner, every drawer. Amanda watched silently from her bed, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. "I told you," she whispered as he crawled under his bed. "They probably went to find better children." Daniel scowled, then ran outside to the backyard, where Uncle Raymond, their kindly neighbor with silver hair and oil-stained hands, was fixing the fence. "Uncle Ray, have you seen my toys?" "They're gone." Raymond looked up, pretending to think. "Your toys, huh? I might have seen something earlier. a couple of toy soldiers marching toward my shed. Daniel's eyes widened. Really? Raymond nodded gravely. They told me they were leaving because someone didn't take care of them, said their owner forgot how to be kind. I do care. I'll never forget again. Daniel shouted, almost in tears. Raymond exchanged a look with Helen, who stood at the porch pretending not to listen. With a gentle smile, he said, well, I suppose everyone deserves a second chance. I think they're waiting for you in the shed. Daniel sprinted across the yard. Inside, a cardboard box sat on the workbench. His soldiers, his race car, his kite, all neatly arranged. He hugged the box to his chest. I'm sorry, he whispered to them, and to no one in particular. From the porch, Helen watched, her eyes warm, proud, and a little sad. She knew that lesson would stay with him far longer than any scolding could. Years later, Amanda would still remember that morning, her brother clutching his toys, her mother smiling through the rising sun, not realizing that this same tenderness, this same imagination, would one day become both the gift and the burden that shaped their entire lives. The wind had changed in Lancaster County. It was the kind of cold that made the sky look fragile, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder than it was. The Whitaker house stood just as it always had, red bricks darkened by rain, the same creaky porch, the same maple tree out front stripped bare for winter. Only time had shifted, quietly, invisibly within its walls. Daniel Whitaker parked his truck by the fence, stepping out into the frosty air. He carried a small paper bag of groceries and a bundle of firewood, habits he'd kept since Helen stopped driving years ago. As he crossed the yard, the faint smell of wood smoke came from the neighboring house where Uncle Raymond Hall was stacking kindling under the shed roof. Morning, Ray, Daniel greeted, his breath clouding. Raymond turned, smiling. You came early, son. Didn't expect you till noon. Daniel shrugged. Couldn't sleep much. Figured I'd stop by and help with the porch before Amanda gets here. Raymond nodded and leaned his weight on the railing, his face lined but warm. How's life treating you, Danny? Daniel smiled faintly. Quiet. Kids are growing too fast. I was thinking about Mom, you know. That old story with the toys. The older man chuckled softly. The one where she made your soldiers run away. Yeah, I still remember how she convinced me they'd left because I didn't take care of them. Raymond's eyes softened. Your mother had a way of teaching without ever raising her voice. That was her gift. She was the one who asked me to hide the toys, you know. She said, let's teach the boy how to love what he has before life does it for him. Daniel smiled, a mixture of warmth and sorrow crossing his face. Sounds like her. A car door slammed in the distance. They turned to see a silver sedan pulling into the driveway. Amanda stepped out, elegant as ever, wool coat, navy scarf, hair pinned back with simple grace. She had her mother's eyes, but carried them differently, with restraint rather than warmth. The city had polished her edges smooth, leaving a quiet sadness in their place. She smiled when she saw them. Hey, Uncle Ray, Danny. Raymond opened his arms. There's my girl. He hugged her gently. You look just like your mama did when she first moved here. Amanda smiled faintly. Let's hope not entirely. They laughed softly, though the air between them held an unspoken worry neither dared name. Inside the house, everything was as it had always been, the old floral wallpaper, the smell of cedar and apple pie, the grandfather clock still ticking the same rhythm it had for 40 years. But the silence felt heavier now, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Helen sat by the window, wrapped in a knitted shawl, her silver hair brushed neatly. She looked up as they entered, her face lighting with recognition, then hesitation. Danny! Mandy! She said cheerfully, using the childhood nickname she hadn't used in decades. Oh, and look who's here. She turned toward Daniel's daughter, Lucy, and smiled wide. "Amanda, sweetheart, you've grown so tall." Daniel froze. Amanda's hand tightened slightly on her coat pocket. Lucy looked at her father, confused. Helen blinked, the realization flickering and fading in her eyes like a candle. "Oh, I must be mistaken." Amanda knelt beside her. "It's okay, Mom. Lucy looks a lot like me when I was little." Helen patted her hand, her voice soft. "Of course. My girl's always so beautiful." Then she added, almost in a whisper, "Your father will be so happy to see you when he gets home." Amanda's heart clenched. The words fell into the room like snow, soft, silent, impossible to stop. Raymond glanced at Daniel, his expression careful. Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom," he said gently, "Dad's not." But Amanda caught his arm, shaking her head just enough to stop him. "Not now," her eyes said. Helen beamed. "Dinner's ready. Sit down, all of you. I made his favorite, beef stew." The table was set for 4. 4 bowls, 4 spoons, a loaf of bread sliced neatly in the middle. Amanda's hand trembled as she adjusted one of the napkins. Daniel sat beside her, watching their mother pour soup into an empty bowl across from her own. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, slow flakes that clung to the window pane. No one spoke. Only the clock ticked on, steady and indifferent, marking time that none of them could hold still. When dinner ended, Helen smiled dreamily, her eyes distant. "He'll be home soon," she said again. Amanda looked down at her untouched plate, the warmth from the stew fading fast. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something shift, the first quiet crack in the fragile glass of her mother's world. The weeks after Helen's birthday blurred together like frost melting on a window pane. Quietly, imperceptibly, until one day the change could no longer be ignored. Amanda kept a small notebook by her bed in Philadelphia, filled with neat, worried handwriting. Missed doctor's appointment, stove left on, forgot to lock the back door. The list grew longer every week. Every evening, she called her mother, and every evening she heard the same tender, distracted voice. "Oh, Amanda, I was just talking to your father. You should have heard him teasing me about burning the pie again," Helen would say with a laugh too light to sound real. Amanda would close her eyes, gripping the phone a little tighter. "That sounds nice, Mom. Maybe next time you two can bake one together," she'd answer softly, pretending for her mother's sake that the past could still breathe. In Lancaster, Daniel visited on weekends. He'd find dishes left in the sink, clothes folded but placed in the freezer, and sometimes the back door open in the middle of the night. "Mom," he'd call gently, walking through the house. He'd find her in the living room, humming to the old record player, 2 teacups placed on the coffee table. "Don't wake him," she would whisper. "Your father's asleep. He had a long day." Daniel would stare at the empty armchair across from her, the same one Charles Whittaker used to sit in, reading the Sunday paper. One afternoon, Amanda drove down from the city to take her mother to the clinic. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine cleaner. Helen sat with her hands folded, eyes wandering toward the window. The doctor spoke in the low, careful tone of a man accustomed to delivering hard truths. "Mrs. Whittaker shows signs of early cognitive decline. It's consistent with age-related dementia," he said, his words precise and kind. "There's no cure, but medication can slow the process. What she'll need most is structure, familiarity, and supervision." Amanda nodded, numb, though the phrase "no cure" echoed like a bell in her head. Helen, on the other hand, smiled faintly, as if the doctor were talking about someone else. "You worry too much," she said, touching Amanda's hand. "I'm fine. Your father takes good care of me." Later that evening, as Amanda and Daniel washed the dishes together, they spoke in whispers while Helen sat in the next room knitting a scarf for Charles. "She's getting worse," Amanda murmured. her voice trembling despite her calm facade. Daniel nodded. I know. She left the gas on again yesterday. The neighbor called me. She can't stay here alone. He set down the plate. He was drying, jaw tight. You think she'll move in with you? Amanda shook her head. She won't leave the house. She won't leave him. At that, Daniel's shoulders sagged. They both turned as Helen's voice drifted in from the living room. Dinner smells wonderful. Sweetheart, she said to the empty chair beside her. You always did like my roast chicken. Amanda's throat tightened. Danny, she whispered, we have to do something. I know, but what can we do that she won't fight? The next morning, Amanda tried to reason with her mother gently over breakfast. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen. Mom, she began, why don't you come stay with me for a while? Just for a few weeks. You'd have your own room. Lucy would love to have you around. Helen smiled serenely, buttering her toast. I can't, sweetheart. Who would take care of Charles? He gets so lonely when I'm gone. Amanda felt her composure falter. Mom. Dad's. She stopped herself, her voice cracking. Mom, it's just, you need someone to take care of you now. Helen reached over and patted her hand. Don't you worry about me, darling. Love takes care of itself. When Amanda left later that day, Helen waved from the porch, her shawl fluttering in the cold wind. Behind her, Daniel loaded the last of the groceries Raymond had dropped off. The older man stood by the gate, his weathered hands in his pockets, watching with quiet concern. She still talks to him every day, Daniel said softly, staring at the kitchen window. Sets the table for two. Waits for him to come home. Raymond sighed. Sometimes love outlives memory, he said, and sometimes it hides inside it. Amanda didn't speak. She stood by the car, staring at the house that had once been her anchor. Now it looked smaller, lonelier, like a place trapped between past and present. When she drove away, she watched the rearview mirror until the brick walls disappeared behind a veil of falling snow. Inside the house, Helen hummed by the fire, 2 cups of tea steaming on the table, one untouched, waiting for a man who would never return. The call came on a rainy morning in early April. Amanda was in her office in Philadelphia, reviewing reports she could barely focus on when her phone began to vibrate. The name on the screen, Mrs. Walker, neighbor, sent a shiver through her. She hadn't heard from the woman in months. Amanda, the elderly voice trembled on the line. I'm so sorry to bother you, dear, but your mother's been taken to the hospital. They said she collapsed near the porch. Raymond's already on his way. Amanda froze. The city around her continued its indifferent rhythm, the printer humming, rain tapping against the glass, but her world went silent. Is she conscious? I don't think so. Honey, you should come as soon as you can. By the time Amanda reached the hospital in Lancaster, the corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and lilies. Raymond stood near the end of the hallway, hat in his hands, his posture telling her everything before he spoke. She's gone, he said quietly. Amanda felt her knees weaken. Raymond caught her gently by the shoulders, steadying her as tears filled her eyes. She hadn't realized until that moment how much hope she'd been carrying, the fragile, unreasonable hope that her mother would somehow outlast the fog in her mind. They entered the hospital room together. Helen lay peacefully, her silver hair brushed neatly back, hands folded across her chest. The monitors beside her had been turned off, leaving the room in a silence that felt sacred. A single cup of tea sat on the bedside table untouched. Amanda reached out, her fingers brushing her mother's. They were cool but soft, still familiar. You waited for him, she whispered. All this time. Raymond placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She wasn't alone, Amanda. The nurse said she smiled before she closed her eyes. That night, Daniel arrived straight from the airport, his eyes red from both travel and grief. They didn't say much. The siblings sat in Raymond's living room, the clock ticking faintly behind them, while rain pressed gently against the windows. "She didn't suffer," Raymond said softly, handing Daniel a mug of coffee. "It was peaceful, like she just drifted away." Daniel nodded, staring at the floor. "That sounds like Mom, even dying quietly." The funeral was held 2 days later at the small stone chapel near the edge of town. It was a modest gathering, neighbors, a few friends, and Raymond standing as the family's steady anchor. A simple arrangement of white roses adorned the casket. Amanda chose her mother's favorite hymn, "Abide with Me," and when the organ played, the sound filled the space like a prayer that had finally found its voice. Afterward, as they stood by the grave, the air smelled of wet earth and lilac. Daniel slipped an old photograph into the casket, a picture of their parents at the county fair, laughing, wind in their hair. "She would have wanted him to have it," he murmured. Amanda knelt, tracing her mother's name engraved on the smooth stone. The sunlight broke through the clouds just long enough to touch her cheek. For a fleeting second, she could almost hear Helen's voice, soft, reassuring, full of life. That evening, back at the family home, the air inside felt heavy but strangely calm. The kitchen clock still ticked, the floral curtains still swayed in the breeze. As though the house hadn't yet understood she was gone. Daniel leaned against the doorway. "We can't sell it," he said suddenly. "It's hers. Always was." Amanda nodded. "I know." Raymond, standing behind them, cleared his throat. "I'll look after it for you," he said simply. "I've got time. And she'd like that." Amanda turned, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle Ray." They stood together for a long time, listening to the rain begin again. Outside, the maple tree bent slightly in the wind, its branches brushing against the window like a whisper. Inside, the house held its breath, empty now, yet still alive with memory. Helen Whitaker's presence lingered not in her voice, nor her scent, but in the way the home still felt watched over. As Amanda turned off the lights, one by one, she couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was still there, somewhere between silence and memory, waiting for the family she loved to come home again. The first snow of December drifted lazily over Lancaster County, blanketing the old Whitaker house in silence. A soft halo of light glowed from its windows, and for the first time in a long while, laughter would fill its rooms again. Amanda pulled up the driveway, the car tires crunching over ice. Inside the back seat, her daughter, Emily, pressed her face to the glass. "Mom, it looks just like in the photos," she whispered. Amanda smiled faintly. "It does, except it used to feel warmer." Daniel's truck was already there, parked beside the porch. The faint sound of carols came from inside, Raymond's doing, no doubt. He'd promised to make the place look alive again, and true to his word, a pine wreath hung on the front door, tied with a red ribbon that fluttered in the cold. When Amanda stepped inside, warmth and cinnamon greeted her. Raymond was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, carving a ham while Daniel untangled a mess of Christmas lights on the living room floor. "Well, look who's finally here," Daniel called. "Thought the city swallowed you for good." Amanda took off her gloves, smiling. Traffic was terrible. Emily insisted on stopping for hot chocolate. Emily ran past her mother, eyes wide as she explored the house she'd only heard about in bedtime stories. "Uncle Danny, is this where you broke Mom's doll?" she asked, pointing toward the living room. Daniel laughed, guilty as charged. Raymond looked up from the counter, chuckling. "And don't forget who had to glue it back together." The old man's voice still carried the calm warmth that had anchored their childhoods. Time had slowed his movements, but not his humor. He handed Amanda a mug of mulled cider. "You did good, kid. It's time this house saw life again." As evening fell, the tree went up, crooked. As always, Daniel's wife and children joined, their laughter echoing through the hallways as garlands and tinsel filled the air with color. Emily found herself drawn to a corner of the room where, half hidden beneath a stack of boxes, sat a cardboard package covered in dust. "Mom," she called. "What's this?" Amanda walked over and froze when she saw the label. "To Mom, with love, Amanda and Daniel." The box was still sealed. Inside was the multi-cooker they'd bought for Helen's 60th birthday, the one she'd never opened. Emily looked up, curious. "Grandma never used it." Amanda brushed the dust away, gently. "No," she said softly. She said she'd wait for the right occasion. The room fell into a brief silence. Even the carols seemed distant. Then Raymond broke it with a tender chuckle. "Well, I'd say Christmas Eve counts." They unpacked it together, the smell of fresh metal mingling with cinnamon and pine. Daniel read the instructions aloud in exaggerated seriousness, and the children laughed when he fumbled with the settings. Soon the kitchen filled with the hiss of steam and the scent of beef stew, Helen's old recipe, the same one she'd made every Christmas Eve. Dinner was warm and simple. The candles flickered as the snow outside deepened. Stories replaced silence. Raymond recalled how Helen had once hidden their toys to teach them responsibility. Daniel told Emily about the time he'd accidentally set the curtains on fire trying to help their mother bake cookies. Amanda listened, smiling, though her chest ached with the weight of memory. Every sound, every scent felt like a conversation with ghosts. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, the house settled into quiet again. The clock ticked steadily, just as it always had. Amanda couldn't sleep. The walls seemed to hum with the echoes of her mother's voice. She rose, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and walked down the dim hallway toward Helen's old room. The door creaked open, releasing a faint whiff of lavender and dust. The room was exactly as her mother had left it. Bed made neatly, curtains drawn halfway, a small lamp on the dresser. Amanda sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers across the worn quilt. Under the lamp, a photo album sat waiting, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it slowly. Photographs filled the pages. Birthdays, picnics, winters long gone. Her mother's handwriting captioned each one. Danny's first tooth. Amanda's recital. Our family, Christmas. 1992. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned another page and smiled through the blur. "Oh, God," she whispered, laughing softly. The New Year's salad photo. The memory unfolded vividly. The year Daniel had tripped carrying the bowl of Olivier salad, sending it flying across the table and onto Amanda's dress. Their father had laughed until he couldn't breathe, and their mother had insisted on taking a picture of the chaos. Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "You're still awake too?" Amanda turned, startled but smiling. "Couldn't sleep. The house feels alive again." He stepped in, looking older than she remembered. "You found the album." She nodded. "Look at this." She handed him the photo. "You ruined Mom's best tablecloth that night." Daniel laughed quietly, sitting beside her. She didn't care. She said it was proof our family knew how to have fun. They sat together for a long while, flipping through pages, the sound of the old clock marking each quiet moment. Outside, snow fell against the window pane, soft and unhurried. "Do you ever think," Amanda murmured, "that she knew we'd end up here again?" Daniel looked at her, thoughtful. "I think she always hoped we would." Amanda closed the album, resting her hand on the cover. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, warm, and fragile, like breath on glass. Neither of them spoke as they turned off the light and left the room. Behind them, the album remained on the nightstand, open to a photograph where a mother laughed with her children under a crooked Christmas tree, capturing, without knowing it, the last perfect moment before time began to take everything away. The house had grown quiet again. The clock downstairs chimed once, then sank back into silence. Outside, snow fell heavier now, veiling the world in white. The others slept, Raymond in the guest room, Daniel's kids curled up on the couch. Only Amanda was awake. She had returned to her mother's room, drawn by something she couldn't name. The soft glow from the hallway light spilled across the floorboards as she stood by the dresser, running her fingers along the edge of the photo album they'd left earlier. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Something above the wardrobe caught her eye. A small cardboard box half covered in dust. "Danny!" she whispered, stepping out into the hallway. Her brother appeared moments later, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" "There's something up there," she said quietly. "A box. I can't reach it." He sighed, still half asleep, but crossed the room and dragged a chair toward the wardrobe. "You and your midnight archaeology," he muttered with a faint smile. When he lifted the box down, a thin layer of dust drifted into the air. As he did, something fluttered to the floor, a photograph, yellowed and bent at the corners. It had slipped behind the wardrobe. Amanda picked it up, frowning. "It's Mom and Dad, but this isn't one I've seen before." The photo showed Helen in her garden, holding a bouquet of lilies. Charles stood beside her, smiling softly. But what unsettled Amanda wasn't the image. It was the faint gray smudge across her father's outline, as if the ink itself had started to fade away. "Help me move this," Daniel said, setting the box aside. Together, they pushed the wardrobe away from the wall. As it shifted, the carpet beneath it rippled slightly. Amanda frowned. "Wait." She knelt and pulled at the edge of the rug. Beneath it, faint lines formed a square shape in the wooden floor. A trapdoor, sealed by a small latch. The siblings stared at each other. "You've lived here your whole life," Amanda whispered. "Did you ever know about this?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Never." Amanda hesitated, her heart hammering. Maybe we shouldn't, but Daniel was already kneeling, pulling the latch. The door creaked open with a low groan, and a faint, sour smell rose from below. Something old, damp, and forgotten. Amanda covered her mouth. "What is that?" Daniel found a flashlight in the drawer and shone it downward. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow wooden staircase. They descended carefully. The air grew colder with each step, the wood creaking beneath their feet. At the bottom, Daniel swept the light across the room, and both of them froze. It wasn't just a basement. It was a shrine. The small space was meticulously arranged. The walls were covered in framed photographs of Helen and Charles, wedding portraits, holidays, family trips. Every inch of the walls was filled. In the corner stood a table draped with a lace cloth, set for two. On it, 2 plates sat side by side, their contents long spoiled, gray, mold-specked food untouched for months. 2 glasses of wine remained, one half empty. Amanda felt her breath catch. "Danny!" Then Daniel's flashlight beam moved again and stopped. At the table's far end sat a chair, and in that chair, upright and still, was a figure, a mannequin. It was dressed in Charles Whittaker's old gray suit, the same one from their parents' wedding photo. A faded tie hung loosely from its neck, and a wig of thinning brown hair rested unevenly on its head. Someone, Helen, had carefully glued a trimmed mustache to its plastic face. Amanda stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh my God!" The air pressed against them, heavy and suffocating. She could almost hear her mother's voice echoing in the room. "Your father takes good care of me." Daniel's hand trembled as he held the flashlight. She was talking to this. Amanda nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "She lived down here, didn't she? She set the table, talked to him, like he never left." The flashlight flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. Dozens of photographs stared back at them. Helen, smiling beside the mannequin, her arm looped lovingly through its stiff plastic elbow. Amanda pressed her hands to her mouth to stop herself from crying. She wasn't losing her mind, she whispered. She was trying to keep him alive. Daniel swallowed hard, unable to look away. She must have built this after Dad died. When she started forgetting, she just came down here instead of upstairs. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then a creak echoed behind them. Raymond stood at the top of the stairs, his face pale in the dim light. "What's going on down there?" he called softly. "Ray," Daniel said hoarsely, "you need to see this." The old man descended slowly, gripping the railing. When his eyes met the scene below, he froze. The flashlight beam lingered on the table, the mannequin, the photographs. All the evidence of a woman's loneliness turned into ritual. He took off his cap and held it to his chest. "Helen," he whispered, "what did you do to yourself?" Amanda turned toward him, tears running freely now. "She just wanted to be with him," she said, her voice breaking. She couldn't let go. Raymond's gaze moved over the room, over the photographs, the plates, the wine glasses. His jaw trembled as he spoke. She was always too tender for this world. Loved so deep it hurt her. Amanda nodded, unable to speak. They stood there, together, surrounded by the remnants of a love that had outlasted reason. The flashlight's beam wavered across the table, resting on the untouched glass of wine, then on the mannequin's still face, painted with care, but lifeless all the same. Above them, the floorboards creaked softly, as if the house itself were exhaling. Raymond finally broke the silence. "Let's go," he said quietly. "Let her rest now." Amanda looked one last time at the small, tragic world her mother had built, a place frozen between memory and devotion, and nodded. As they climbed back up the stairs, she could still feel it, the quiet pulse of love lingering in the air, too strong to die, too lonely to stay sane. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The air in the small basement seemed to thicken around them, heavy with dust, memory, and something almost sacred. Amanda stood motionless, her eyes on the mannequin, on the stillness that had once been her mother's refuge. Daniel leaned against the wall, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Raymond removed his cap, his face pale and drawn. It was Raymond who finally broke the silence. His voice was low, steady, almost reverent. "Let's not tell anyone," he said. "Let her rest. The world wouldn't understand this." Amanda nodded slowly, tears running down her face. "She just wanted to keep him close," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "She lived in this for years, and none of us knew." Raymond sighed, a sound that seemed older than time itself. "Some love doesn't die. It just forgets how to leave." He glanced at the room one last time. "Come on, kids. Let's put things right." Amanda found an old rag and began wiping the table with trembling hands. The food had decayed into shapeless gray, and when she moved the plates, the smell rose sharper. Daniel carried them upstairs in a trash bag, silent. Raymond gathered the photographs that had fallen to the floor, stacking them neatly in a small pile. They worked in quiet understanding, each movement careful, almost ceremonial. When Daniel returned, he helped his sister pull the lace cloth from the table. It tore slightly at the edges, brittle with time. Amanda folded it gently, as though afraid to hurt it. "Should we?" Daniel gestured to the mannequin. Amanda hesitated. The dim light caught the suit, the tie, the mustache her mother had glued on with careful hands. It looked almost human in the stillness. "No," she said finally. "Leave him. It's what she would have wanted." Raymond nodded. "Then we'll let them stay together." They stood in silence once more. The only sound was the soft hum of the old pipes in the walls and the whisper of wind through the vents. Amanda reached for the flashlight and switched it off. Darkness closed around them, not frightening but calm, like the closing of a story that had been waiting too long to end. When they climbed back up, the trapdoor creaked shut. Daniel pressed it down carefully, covering it with the edge of the rug. Together, they slid the wardrobe back into place until the faint outline of the door disappeared entirely. It was past midnight now. Upstairs, faint laughter echoed through the ceiling. The children's voices, muffled by floors and distance. A burst of color flickered across the frosted windows. Fireworks, bright and fleeting, painting the snow in reds and golds. Daniel leaned against the wall, exhausted. "They're watching the fireworks," he said quietly. "They don't even know." Amanda stood by the window, her eyes glistening. Outside, the night sky bloomed with light. The old house seemed to glow with it, the sound of celebration brushing against its walls like the echo of another life. "She just wanted to keep us together," Amanda whispered, her voice breaking. Even if it was only in her own way. Raymond placed a hand on her shoulder. "And she did," he said softly. "Look around. You're all here, aren't you?" Amanda smiled faintly through her tears. For the first time in years, the house was full again. Laughter upstairs, the smell of cinnamon lingering in the kitchen, snow glittering outside. It was as if Helen had orchestrated this reunion from somewhere unseen. They moved quietly through the hallway, turning off the last lights. Daniel paused at the family photo on the wall, their parents' wedding picture, framed in oak. He traced his fingers along the glass. "She never really left him," he murmured. Amanda looked at the photograph too. In it, Helen was radiant, her hand resting lightly on Charles's arm. For a moment, Amanda could almost imagine her mother stepping out from the picture, taking her father's hand again. Raymond cleared his throat. "You two should get some rest. Morning's not far." They nodded. Daniel went upstairs to check on the children, and Amanda lingered by the window, watching the last fireworks fade into smoke. The air outside shimmered faintly with frost. Somewhere down the road, church bells began to ring, soft, distant, marking the start of Christmas Day. Amanda whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "Merry Christmas, Mom." In the silence that followed, she could almost hear a reply, not in words, but in warmth, a presence settling gently around her like a blanket. When she finally turned out the last light and headed upstairs, the house exhaled softly as if it, too, had been holding its breath. Down below, behind the wardrobe and the hidden door, the basement remained still. The flashlight lay on the table beside the mannequin, its faint red indicator, light blinking once before it went dark. The two chairs stood side by side, their edges touching. The folded lace cloth rested neatly at the center of the table. The photographs watched from the walls, not haunting but patient, eternal. Outside, dawn crept over the fields, painting the snow in pale gold. The Whitaker house stood quietly against the light, whole again in its own way, a place where grief had turned to memory, and memory had found peace. And as the first sunbeam reached through the frosted window and touched the trapdoor below, it fell across the word Amanda had whispered hours earlier, a truth that would remain between them forever. She just wanted to keep us together.